Don't ever believe anything that comes from a government official. That's rule number one. But of course, the Fed, in order to maintain some degree of credibility, most of their credibility has been lost already, but to maintain some credibility, they have to increase rates to a level where they can pretend that they're actually fighting inflation. It's not very clear how they fight inflation, because inflation can occur in building prices like the home prices, or it can occur in commodities, or it can occur in stocks, or in bonds, or in wages. So far, the increase in interest rates has done is to reward wealthy people to some extent, including myself. You take my portfolio, which has maybe 15-20% of its money in cash. 2 years ago, I didn't get anything on my cash, and now I can place money for 1 year at over 6% interest. Some people have actually benefited from the increase in interest rates, and the people that are hurt are the people that are poor and therefore have large credit card balances. They have large home loans, mortgages, student loans, consumer loans, and so forth. And all these loans, cost of these loans has all gone up meaningfully, not little. And number two, that is good, the one that is hurting in the long run the most is the government, because they have huge debts. And whereas a clever treasurer of a company, when interest rates were artificially low, would have borrowed at, say, 1-2% for 30 years, Miss Janet Yellen, the Secretary of the Treasury, continued to borrow short-term in 2020, 2021, when interest rates were lower than ever in the history of the United States. So it shows what the skill is of these government officials. It's a complete disaster, but that we've known. Whatever the government does is worse than what the private sector does. It's nothing new. But what I want to say is that now the interest on the government debt in the US is exploding, and it will continue to go up. By next year, I think it will be over $1 trillion. And soon it will be also in Japan. So the US is not unique in that respect. All the governments are in the same position. But what I want to show is some people benefit from rising interest rates and others are hurt. But to believe that you can look at the level of interest rates and conclude that money is tight, or that the money supply is expansionary, is oversimplistic. You could have interest rates like in Turkey and Argentina at, say, 80%, and inflation would be 85%, and that would be an inflationary condition. You could have interest rates at 2%, and if you have no inflation at all or deflation, it's tight monetary policy. You can observe whether money is tight or not at the level of speculation. We had recently again huge speculation in American shares and in cryptocurrencies and also some commodities, where in some instances stocks shoot up by 50% in one day. When money is tight, this doesn't happen. And Goldman Sachs has a financial index which indicates, is money tightening or is money loosening, and are credit conditions improving. This index has been declining. In other words, the liquidity conditions have been improving. The government, the way I see it, they could force people to lock down. They can force the people to use a certain currency. Say they can issue a crypto and print money and so forth, and they can ban or declare as illegal other cryptocurrencies and so forth. These are all things they can do. Now, if you live in a small village or a small town and you have a butcher that you know, you can go to the butcher and say, look, I buy meat from you and I can pay you in goods or services and so forth. I'm an electrician. I can look after your electricity requirements in your butcher shop and in your private home. So barter comes up, or coins are coming back, like silver coins and gold coins and so forth. So all these things, we don't know exactly how they will play out. But one thing I can say is paper money will at some point sort of disappear, because people will realize that a dollar today will be worth less in 2 years, in 5 years, 10 years time, as it has been in the past. If you look at your grandparents and at your parents, what they could buy for $1 and what you can buy today is unbelievable. Just watch some old movies from the 1920s or 1930s. Occasionally they show a street and advertisings of room rates. You could have a hotel in New York City for $1 a night. That was already quite luxurious. For 25 cents, you got a cheap hotel. Well, if you look at the developments, say 50 years ago, 80% of global trade, or 85%, flowed through G7 countries, in other words, Western Europe and the US. Today, the industrial production of China is much larger than the industrial production of the US, and its exports are larger and so forth, with the result that as a percent of global trade, the US share of global trade has gone down, and the share of global trade of China, and also increasingly now India and other countries, are going up. So over time, the other countries, that would include Singapore, I wouldn't call Singapore a BRICS country, but being located within BRICS area, all these countries, they will increasingly trade with each other, and they will clear the trade no longer through the SWIFT system in the US, but essentially with each other directly. And so the US, by declaring embargoes on all the countries they don't like, they actually damage themselves. And now they damage themselves even more, in the sense that they elected Victoria Nuland as a deputy director of the State Department or something, in a very senior position. She is the super neocon hawk that would like to essentially bomb the whole world if it was in favor of the US. And that always gets me. When the Chinese build a railroad in Laos and in Cambodia, the Western media bitches about China and say, yeah, there's all geopolitical and there's the influence of China. Well, what do they prefer, these Western media people? Do they prefer the Americans who carpet bomb Laos, Vietnam and Cambodia? And still today there are explosions because these carpet bombs are splitter bombs that can explode years afterwards. They also freeze money and take money away and so forth. At the end, I mean, the Roman Empire recognized early that it was important to have their provinces integrated into the empire, and that they would become friends. The friendship is very important between nations. And if everybody is your enemy, and if you manage to even make good friends to enemies, like the US was a very good friend of Saudi Arabia forever, and they managed now to destroy that relationship.